What is up, my dashing dudes? I am the Hans TV, and do you like getting revenge on choosing beggars? Because that is something that happens today in our first installment of r/ProRevenge. Our first story comes from A&B Thab, How to Dispose of Choosy Beggars, the Valtrex edition. When boyfriend and I first moved away from armpit to butt crack around 1996 or so, we moved into an apartment building that was really a huge house broken up into 5 or 6 apartments. A few days after moving into the top apartment, we noticed that boyfriend actually kinda knew the couple on the ground floor. As it turned out, boyfriend had graduated with the girl, a blonde with a crunchy, buy me C-grams, 80s perm. Now, we didn't realize this at first, but she was a complete and total Brittany, and he was her male counterpart. For those of you wondering what a Brittany is, it's from another story that user posted, and I will link it in the description below if you want to give that a check. At first, they seemed nice enough. We hung out a bit and went out a few times to the clubs. I even helped Brittany get on at the place where I worked. Telemarketing, but almost twice what minimum wage was at the time. It wasn't until we lived there for a couple of months that we found out, rather by happenstance, that the couple had a rather extensive opioid habit. I was at work one evening and I had a terrible headache. Brittany came to my desk at break time. We usually went to eat together and asked me what was wrong. I told her I had a headache and asked her if she had any Tylenol. Well, no, but she had a painkiller. Turns out that she was talking about hydrocodone, and I politely declined it. Over the next few days, she offered me a painkiller for everything, from a tummy ache to being in a bad mood. That's when I started to catch on. As it turns out, Brittany and Brian's lives revolved around their pill problems. It was all they talked about. We didn't want to make enemies of people that we literally lived on top of, so we started subtly pulling back from the friendship. Eventually, Brittany got fired from the job, and that's when the choosy beggaring began. They started out asking to borrow $20. We did it, and they paid us back. No problem. Next thing that happened is that they wanted to share their cable account. Since we were all in the same building, we could run a line and no one would know. Their idea was that we take turns paying each month. Of course, we went first. I did not like this at all, but figured that if it went pear-shaped, we would have a legitimate excuse to get rid of them. The third thing that happened was that Brittany came to our doors in tears. She said that Brian was downstairs crying. She said that they had no food in the house and that Brian's children were with them for the weekend and they were hungry. We weren't exactly domesticated then, so we had no food to give them. Boyfriend and I are soft-hearted, and we were kinda naive back then. So we lent them some money for food. I think it was $50 or so. The next day, Brittany is back, and she's going on and on about Brian's pill issue. Not hers. No, it was Brian. Sometime during the conversation, she says that Brian had made her lie to her parents and say they needed food for the children to get money for drugs. Boyfriend and I just looked at each other. We didn't say a word to her, but we were furious. A few days later, our cable was turned off. Since the account was in Brittany and Brian's name, we went down to their apartment to find out what was going on. They tried to cover it up at first by making excuses and hemming and hawing around, but it didn't take long to figure out that the bill hadn't been paid in over 2 months. We had given them money for the cable bill that month, but they spent it on something else. Gee, I wonder what. We ended up opening our own account, and they actually had the nerve to ask us to share with them. That's a nope from me, dog. They got very pushy about the issue, and a few words were exchanged. It wasn't a pleasant conversation, but we finally had the excuse we needed to cut them off. The problem was that they would not leave us alone. They badmouthed us to other people in the building, they stole things from our cars, they called in noise complaints on us, and sent the police to beat on our doors, waking us up at 2 and 3 a.m. There were a few other things too, but that was the final straw. I was just fed up. One night while watching TV, a commercial for Valtrex came on, and I got an idea. As it turns out, the first few doses of the anti-herpes medication was free. All we needed was a name and an address to have free information and a voucher for free samples sent to your home. We dialed the number and sat back and waited. Now, I know the subscribing people to junk mail or dirty magazines is kind of a cliche, and we didn't really expect anything to come of it. What we had hoped for at most was a blow-up of some sort. We figured that if we were lucky, there would be a fight and some cheating accusations. Maybe if fortune really smiled upon us, they would even break up. What we got was so much more. It was, in fact, glorious. About 10 days after we made the call, a huge ruckus outside got our attention. Brittany was in a rage. She was in the yard, screaming at Brian, calling him every name in the book. Brian was standing there, haplessly watching as she threw his belongings into the yard. Clothes were everywhere. A TV and a lamp smashed on the sidewalk. Brittany sat in the middle of it like a blonde banshee in booty shorts, cursing and screaming at the top of her lungs. We were extremely gratified when she asked which of his fick and hoes gave it to him. Eventually, Brian lost patience, and the two started brawling in the middle of the street. Beer bottles and gauntlets were thrown. A weave was snatched off. It was a scene fit for the Jerry Springer show. Eventually, the police showed up, and Brittany and Brian were driven off in the city's free black and white cab service. They were taken to spend the night in the city's free hotel accommodations, aka the county jail. Apparently, when the police intervened, the couple was found to be in possession of illegal prescription drugs, and a night in jail turned into multiple nights in jail. Imagine that. They never returned to the building, and we never saw or heard from them again. For all I know, they're still in jail. Edit. I'm not sure I want to disclose the name of my hometown and my current town. Both places are moderately famous, the subject of a major motion picture each, so it would probably be easy for people from back home to identify me. Both towns suck, which is why I chose Armpit and Butt Crack as the town names. The place where I'm from is very small and sucks just because of small town politics and such. The place where I live now, although relatively small, has the highest per capita drug OD rate in the US, so yeah, it used to be a nice place, but now it sucks. Edit edit. Funny how the stories that I think won't ever go as well blow up, and the ones I think are awesome are usually just the opposite. I'm really appreciative of all the feedback, both critical and complimentary, I've received from everyone. Man, these choosy beggars really got what was coming to them. I mean, partake in illegal actions and don't pay back the people who have given you money based on their own kindness, and you get bad karma. Our next story comes from Alifisha. Run me over because you don't like my long hair? Enjoy your ride. I'm posting this on behalf of a friend. They don't care to make a Reddit account, lol. So, back when I was 11, 22 now, I was always sort of an introverted person. I always got along with people older than me and hung around my family rather than going out to friends, though living in the country, there were always the occasional times I had a flavor of the month friend I would go visit with. Being an introvert, I never really felt happy around people. The loneliness was rather frustrating, so you can imagine I had to get out of the house every now and again. My cousin's was often a place I would go to hang out. She was great and always super supportive of me. One of my favorite things to do was draw chalk on the sidewalk and then blast it with the hose and watch the figure I drew melt, because that's just how boys are sometimes, I guess. Here comes I don't know what to call her too much. I was very young, and to me, she was just a bully. So let's call her that. The bully. She had long, very well cared for, dirty blonde hair, which was rather unique for the area. And she was, from what my cousins told me, very popular at school. She was the only one who had hair down to her shoulder blades. All the other girls wore their hair short because this girl and her clique of goons would harass and bully other girls if they had long hair. Childhood gang level nonsense. This was also why my cousin never grew her hair anymore, which annoyed me because even though I was a boy, I really did enjoy brushing the hair of my sister and cousins. It was always incredibly relaxing, and even today I will do things like clean the feet of close family who needs it, like my diabetic sister or my family friend who has issues with dead skin under her toenails. Gross to some, but I enjoy helping them with those issues. Regardless, here she came, down the street on her bike, and as she noticed me, a boy with long hair, drawing a crappy picture of Ganon from Ocarina of Time so I could melt him with a hose, pretending it was the Master Sword. I had fun, but as I was drawing in the swords, this girl hopped her bike over onto the sidewalk, and with me barely having enough time to get my head out of the way, she hit my arms and right leg with her bike. She pretended it was an accident and acted like it was my fault for not getting out of her way in time. It was awful, and it bruised the heck out of my shin. My parents noticed me in pain through the window and came out to check what was wrong and tried to walk me inside, which I couldn't because being hit by a 14-year-old athletic Nordic girl on a bike at high speeds is a lot of damage, you might imagine. So I had to hop inside as my dad held my hand. Some long story after, I learn about the girl after this incident and I get rather upset. Not because she hit me, but because she was really badly bullying my older and younger cousins I was very protective of at the time, which sort of made me formulate a plan of revenge in my head. Being 11, it wasn't very elaborate, but the idea was to scare the living crap out of her so she would leave us alone. I did not really intend for things to go as well as they did. Here's where I got my completely unintentional luck of the draw revenge. A few weeks later, I decided to go out and do my thing, draw with chalk, and this time I kept my eye out for her. I got lucky, I think, because this time I managed to catch her as she was coming down the road. I didn't have much for book smarts, and I wasn't very strong, but I had a great aim and nice throw strength. Not fantastic, not scholarship level of course, but it was good enough to accurately hit a soda can with a rock from maybe 20 feet away. My only real plan was to chuck a stick to scare her, but what happened was absolutely 1 in a million. As she was cruising down the road, near the school, at a modest speed, she looked over in my direction and then continued biking forward. Once she got closer, I picked up a long and straight stick from the willow tree in the yard and threw it like the practice javelins they had at the school's gym, with the little weighted tips, and I gave it a chuck at her, trying in no way to hit her, but to land it in front of her to scare her. Well, what happened was, my 11-year-old aim was apparently so good, and the stars aligned so perfectly, that when I did throw this stick, it managed to somehow land so perfectly that it spoke to the girl and sent her flying clear off of her bike into the pavement. Being athletic, she was mostly fine, caught herself well but dinged her elbow and knees a little, but otherwise, again, was completely fine. Just scared out of her dang mind because she had no idea what just happened or how. All she knew from the look on her face was that she was on her bike one moment and flying through the air for a split second the next. Her bike's front wheel was trashed, and she looked like she was in shock. I was honestly very scared I would get in trouble, but she picked her bike up and started walking it home with a look of fear herself, as if she knew she would get yelled at by her parents for messing up her bike. Again, she was basically completely fine, maybe a scrape and a bruise, and scared out of her mind because of what happened. Suffice to say, when she saw me hiding, I think she put 2 and 2 together and stopped messing with my cousins or me. And later in life, she turned out to be reasonably nice, so I suppose everything worked out. Still, imagine how terrifying it must be to get spoked mid-pedal stroke. That's one for the books, eh, Reddit? That's all for now. Don't really have much to say on this story other than the bully really got what she deserved. You shouldn't run over people just because they're different than you. Our final story from today comes from Just What's Up There. He said he was going to ruin my reputation. I destroyed his life. Because the law is involved, I'm going to be super vague about some details. I went on a gap year from university, and when I came back, I needed to find some flatmates. There were 3 guys from campus that I didn't know, and this other guy, Dave, who is doing the same degree. Dave is probably 10 years older than me. Dave said he knew the other guys, and they were cool, and everyone I talked to in positions of authority said Dave was a great person. Dave had been renting an apartment for 2 years, and his landlord had recently bought a deceased estate. He transferred that onto that lease, and we moved in together. Dave was not a great housemate, but it wasn't anything too serious. Until exam period. If things in the house weren't exactly how we wanted them, he would get angry. At the same time, he would not do dishes, and he would take up the most space in the kitchen and bathroom with his stuff that nobody was allowed to touch. The rest of us started to become friends, and we would eat together every night. At 6ish, Bill would come home and start prepping dinner. Then, a bit later, Kev and Pete would come home and help. I would join them, and we would eat and chat, and then go to bed. After exams, Dave started partying and coming home drunk. Then he stopped leaving the house but continued to drink. He started being angry over little things like making noises after 8 p.m., who was eating his food. No one was. All he ate was bacon. My housemates are Muslim, and I ate what they made. Especially towards Kev for some reason. One second he would love Kev, and the next he would hate him. Dave lost his job a few days later. We felt bad, and he was struggling to pay rent, so we started making him dinner. I'm a bad cook, so it was mostly the other boys, and they even made him an extra portion for lunch. The guys wanted to try something new. It required a blender. Dave walked in and accused the guys of using his blender, remembering they are making him dinner. Also, it wasn't his. Kev turns on the blender while he's talking, and Dave snaps. Dave starts yelling and grabs Kev by the neck and pushes him outside. Our landlord begged us to give him a week because he had been perfect for the previous 2 years and she knew him through church. I said if he was still a problem in 5 days, all 4 of us were leaving. Worrying about losing the 4 of us, she agreed. We went to the police and they took a statement but said it wasn't violent enough for him to get arrested. The next day, we sat him down and told him to stop drinking. I knew what was going to happen, so I made a plan. I was going to get him out. He got angry, but let us pour his whiskey down the sink. He was literally shaking with rage as I poured. He was still sneaking drinks and was getting angry. The other boys are Asian and me and Dave are white, so of course he started being racist. He started saying Kev was a beanis head for being disrespectful about the blender, and so he was justified in being aggressive. Every time he got ticked off, I would call him out. I told him I was going to take the path of least effort to get him out of the house. After 5 days, I called the landlord and said that Dave had to go. The landlord said Dave could move back to his original apartment. He saw this as a challenge to his dominance or something equally as stupid and said that it was his house. I made it clear to him that I had told the landlord he was still drinking. Then he started threatening me and he said he was going to ruin my life at home and uni. I set up a camera after he passed out from the vodka he wasn't drinking. Now, it was a waiting game. The next day, he started. I wasn't scared because he had been drunk every day for 2 weeks. He could barely walk, so when I got home, he walked into the kitchen and started. I laughed at him. He got more annoyed. He let out a slew of abuse. I basically told him how much I hated him. I'm a white immigrant who moved here when I was a baby, so you can't actually tell. So he started me comparing to them, the other housemates, like they were lesser and now I was lesser. Then he started challenging me to fight him. When I told him I wasn't going to hit him, he told me that all the people of my background were tough. I was like, okay. Then he hit me. I deflected it. I'm not particularly big or strong, but he was super drunk, so it wasn't hard for me to dodge his punches. Bill came out to see what was happening, so I told him to call the police. That was a mistake. While I was distracted, Dave hit me in the face. The police came, and I was completely fine, so they couldn't arrest him for assault. Apparently, it's a civil matter. But I could get a restraining order the next morning. He came out to taunt me after the cops left because he was still in his house. ProRevenge time. I got a restraining order. He isn't allowed within 500 meters of me or my uni. Basically, I spend most of my time in the field. Our field research center is at a public dock, and Dave used to work as a mechanic there. He also picked up seasonal work at a few other places in the dock, like refueling and engine work. All the other unis have their field centers at the same dock, so basically, he was banned from everywhere. So I took great joy in sending an email to all the companies in the dock, informing him that if he showed up, he was in violation of the order. As part of the degree, we get a 2 special license, and there is a medical requirement. So I informed them of his drinking, and he was put under medical review and had his license stripped from him, and is unable to obtain his second license. The best bit was he checked out equipment for personal use, which means he had to pay for it. He took it for a spin with our housemate Bill and asked him to pay him back, which is technically an illegal charter operation. I got Bill to write everything down and send it off to the relevant authority, so now he is under investigation for illegal charter operation. Also, the dates of his partying line up with his equipment rental, and there are pictures of him drinking before and after he checked out the equipment. He has nowhere to live, so he is sleeping in his car. He has been kicked out of uni. He has to go to court for both assaults and the restraining order. He has to go to court for running illegal charters and operation under the influence. He can't ever finish his degree, and he can't get any of the seasonal work he was counting on. Edit. I was going to use a throwaway, but that was a bust. This was supposed to be a super anonymous, so I changed the profession. Just replace Field Science Research Center with hangar, dock with airport, and equipment with aircraft. Edit 2. Sorry about the bad grammar and punctuation. I've been dealing with this, so it sort of just fell out of my brain. I think as pilots, we should be held to a higher standard. We have strict rules to ensure that safety is the main priority. Alright, my dashing dudes, that's going to be all for r/ProRevenge for today. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed over the past few days, and if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Drop a comment down below and tell me what y'all want me to read next.